David Moyes has changed a lot of players positionally since he's been at West Ham United. We've seen the evolution of Aaron Cresswell, I believe, from a decent Premier League standard left back into a guy who, in his pomp under David Moyes, was amongst the best assists providers in the Premier League. One of the most creative defenders, if not the most creative defender that we've seen in some time. It's only those pesky rascals at Liverpool at the time with Robertson, Trent Alexander-Arnold, who were really better in him. Yes, I know there's Cancelo now, but you get my point. What David Moyes did is he took this player and he evolved him. We've also seen the evolution of Michail Antonio. Now, I know it might have dipped a little bit now, but he took a winger who, at the point where David Moyes came in, was probably best as a super sub, and took him in to become somebody who was proficient at playing centre forward. He evolved him. That's not what this video is about, though, because whilst David Moyes has changed some players' positions and they've evolved, and we're talking about the evolution of some players, I want to talk about the devolution of Tomas Soucek, because, quite frankly, I do think that's exactly what has happened. Let me just take you back to a quote that was on one of our channels. Can't remember what, and I do apologise, but I really should be, when I'm quoting somebody, credit the person who made this comment, but it was in the live chat and it disappears off the edge of the page very, very quickly. The chat was, and also it was in one of Gio's videos actually, but the comment was, Pablo Fornals is no longer the player we purchased. The insinuation on that is that we purchased this sort of tricky player who was an attacking left-sided player for Spain under 21s. Now he's not. I have been calling him recently a holding wide player. That's what he's become. He's now a workhorse. He's now a defensive player. So his role has changed. But I want to talk about Tomas Soucek now. And before we go into massive detail on it, let's just have a little history lesson for ourselves here. Tomas Soucek came in the January transfer window. Same one as Jarrod Bowen. Soucek was straight in the team. Well, we really had a player there. We had a goal-scoring midfielder. And his goals, and Bowen, and a lot of other players as well, helped us remain in the Premier League. When Moyes came in, we were in relegation, flirting with relegation. Not rock bottom at the bottom of the league, we're flirting with it. Tomas Soucek was a big factor in us staying up. There's no doubt about that at all. And what we had was a box-to-box midfielder who was scoring goals. Then for the whole of the next season, his first full season, Tomas Soucek was a rampaging menace of a midfielder, almost unplayable, you might say. I remember saying very early on at the start of that season, I said, this guy might score double figures, and he did. And it wasn't some ridiculously prophetic prediction that I did. It was quite clear once you saw the amount of times he was getting into the box, the amount of chances he had, how effective he was. It was quite an easy punt. It was an easy prediction to say this guy's going to get 10 goals. And as I say, so it proved. Then things started to change, because here's the point. For Tomas Soucek to be able to get forward and attack as much as he did, there had to be sacrifices made. And the biggest sacrifice, I think, was made by Declan Rice. Now, you've got to remember, at this point, Declan Rice is still forging his reputation as a midfielder. Declan Rice was when David Moyes was in his first stint, David Moyes did play Declan Rice, played him a couple of times. That was a centre-back. It was when Pellegrini came in, Pellegrini said, no, you're not a centre-back, you're a midfielder. I don't know. I've sort of always wondered whether or not, if David Moyes had remained, whether Declan Rice always would have made it a professional footballer. But would Moyes have ever put him into midfield? I don't know. Possibly would, probably would. Who knows? He changes players' positions anyway. But we might well find we had England's outstanding centre-back on our hands. Anyway, it doesn't matter. My point is that when you've got this goal-scoring midfielder, it's easy to ask Declan to sit back, particularly considering that he was originally a defender. Then, as Declan's ability started to shine through, as he got better, as the world started to awaken to quite how good Declan Rice was, it was quite clear that Declan needed a little bit more licence to get forward. So we then go to the next season, last season. Last season, very much it appeared that Soucek had to take a back seat. Basically, it was Soucek had to sit so as Rice could attack. It's not just me that said it. It was very much, it wasn't a narrative by the club, but it was something that was on all the chat rooms. Chat rooms don't exist anymore. On all the comments on videos, on forums, social media. Declan Rice has become the box-to-box midfielder. Now, again, a sacrifice has to be made at that point. And what's that sacrifice? Well, that sacrifice was Tomas Soucek. And the problem with that is that Tomas Soucek, the goals dried up. Well, of course the goals dried up because his role had changed. And I think when you look at it, I guess in hindsight, it's no surprise that his role changed. Go back to what I said at the start of the video. That's what David Moyes does. David Moyes likes to tweak the roles of players. And I mean, what I mentioned then, I mentioned Fornals, I mentioned Cresswell, I mentioned Antonio. There are others as well. He does like to move players around. He's done it with Lanzini. Lanzini is now more of a holding midfielder. Arnautovic, when Moyes arrived, was playing on the left wing. He said, oh, no, you go up front. So I'm not criticising Moyes in as much as saying it all fails. Some of it works, and some of it works really well. However, with the instance of Soucek, I've got to be honest, I don't like it, and I don't like it at all. Before I go any further, can I please just point you in the direction of Hammers Chat's Patreon account? What's Hammers Chat's Patreon? Well, basically, Hammers Chat's Patreon account is our third channel. We have this channel, we have the main Hammers Chat channel, and we have a third one, which is a pay-to-view service. The reason for joining that, well, you could have numerous reasons. We'd like to think the first and main reason you do it is to support Hammers Chat, which allows us to provide the amount of content across all channels that we do and helps us do this as our job. So we're here during the day to be able to do videos like this. Also, what you do is you get a load of additional content. In October, for instance, we had 31 additional videos. We have player ratings videos. We have breakfast build-up shows. We have special guests on. I mean, we had Harry Redknapp was last month. We have Hammerlytics, which is a very, very different view on football, on West Ham, and really dissects everything in a really nuanced and statistical fashion. If you like that, we have podcasts. We have prize giveaways. There is so much going on the Hammers Chat Patreon channel. We have 3 different tiers to cater for each different price points. Go and check it out. The link is in the description below. We'd very much appreciate it if you'd support Hammers Chat that way. Back onto Tomas Soucek. As I say, I don't like it. I don't like what we're seeing from him. I don't like his new role. Now, here's the point. Let's go back to that Tomas Soucek in that rampaging first full season, or first 18 months, whatever you want. He was really undroppable then, and I get it. Absolutely, totally. He was undroppable, and rightly so. Why would you drop someone who was yielding such returns, basically? Yet, he's still undroppable now. And the trouble is, I do feel sorry for Soucek, because it must be, there's not the same glory in being a defender. And here's my point, that's what he is now. Tomas Soucek is a defender. He was never the most technical. He was never dribbling the ball like Ronaldinho, but that didn't matter because he had an uncanny knack of finding space in the box. They weren't all headers. Some of them were just late-timed runs. Some of them were just tap-ins. It's a skill. It's an art form. I mean, Kevin Nolan made a career out of it, finding space in the box, making late runs. And I think that's a really, really good asset to have. But when you take that away from him, you are left with a defender because you're not getting the passing range, you're not getting the silky skills, you're not getting the dribbling. A hard-working defender, a defender who runs more miles than anybody else, quite possibly. But look at the recovery positions that player takes up. And that's why when we do our player ratings, which we do on Patreon, as I mentioned earlier, I've now taken to assessing him as a defender. I don't expect any more. But I also think this is to the detriment of the West Ham team. And I do wonder what David Moyes is doing. But anyway, it begs this question, and this question, we get it all the time. I don't mean people are asking us. People often use the chat, the YouTube chat, just to vent their own frustrations, you know, what their opinions. It's your chance to have your opinion on West Ham, of course, you know. And what a lot of them say is, why does Moyes continue? Soucek's playing terribly. Why does Moyes continue to pick him? And I think when I read those, they're still viewing it as the old Soucek. Soucek's not providing the goals anymore. Why is David Moyes still picking him? I think David Moyes is delighted with Soucek. I think David Moyes is really happy because Soucek's doing exactly what he's asked Soucek to do. basically be an extra central defender. Drop in, tackle, cover positions, intercept. There was an instance in the game against Man United. Craig Dawson gave the ball away, was not under pressure at all, gave the ball away. Soucek recovered. Soucek was in the centre-back position like that. Well, there's a reason for that, because he wasn't up in the attacking midfield. He was quite close. His starting point was quite close to centre-back position. He's there, did it in the game before as well. Covered for Zuma, cut out a ball that was coming in from Cresswell's side. He's there or he's thereabouts. He is very, very defensive-minded. And I think that's what we have to take into account, though. But here's my issue with it, and here's why I don't like it. I am not against us having a defensive midfielder. Of course, you need one, don't you? Everybody needs one. I think my problem is we have more than one, particularly when you add in what I mentioned about Fornals, who is a left, what would I say, a wide holding midfielder, a holding wide midfielder, a holding winger, whatever. I've even forgotten my own terms. And it muddies the waters even further, particularly if you're going to play defensive players in other positions. If you're going to play Flynn Downs there, who was really a defensive attacking midfielder. Look, it's a rewriting of what we understand football positions to be. How many times has David Moyes played Cresswell at centre half? Yet still from centre half he's creative. So we have a creative central defender. But a defensive attacker, it takes a little bit to get your head round. But the one thing that I dislike about the whole thing is that, by and large, the switch, and whatever switch you want to allude to, be it Soucek or anybody else, has resulted in us having generally one or two less attacking players on the pitch. And it shows. The football's got worse. I didn't ever subscribe to this theory that the football under David Moyes was terrible. It really wasn't. I thought it was bad under Allardyce. I really did. But I thought under Moyes, we've played some good football at times. I quite like counter-attacking football, by the way. If you're a regular watcher, you'll know this. Not this season. Take this season out of it because Liverpool are crap this season. But go back to the last 3 or 4 seasons. I prefer the way Liverpool play football to the way Man City play football. I just prefer it. It's fast. I never... Barcelona used to bore the hell out of me, right? So it's not like football has got to be aesthetically beautiful, and I do appreciate that sort of stuff is. But I like a high tempo, I like an intensity to my football. So I quite enjoyed David Moyes' teams quite a lot of the time, because you know what? Even though we were a counter-attacking team, it was a bit of swashbuckle to it. There was some intensity, there was some drive. That appears to have gone now, and it's because we have so many defensive players. And I think it really came to a point against Manchester United where actually we had a load of defensive players on the pitch, yet the instruction, particularly for the last 20, 25 minutes, was to attack. And you were asking defensive players to attack. So, you know, poor old Kurt Zouma was trying his best to attack. It's not his job. It's not what he does. Bless him. It's really not. We basically had very few attacking players on the pitch, yet David Moyes wanted to get a goal. And I just think it's very, very hard to retrain that and then get that back. And suddenly you're asking Tomas Soucek at that point, oh, Thomas, get into the box now. Be that guy that you were 18 months ago or whatever. I think that's very, very hard. I do think it gives us a problem. I think it gives us a problem with Soucek in there. Personally, I would like Flynn Downs dropped back next to him, because I think you get all of the defensive qualities you get with Soucek, aside maybe from the towering heading. But what you'd also get is you'd get the passing. And Soucek gives the ball away far too much. The moment he's asked to do anything remotely expansive, he cannot do it. He's just not comfortable in possession. I don't blame him for that. That's not his forte, either being the late run into the box to score the headers or the late tap-ins, or with him being this new sort of secondary backup centre-back who plays in midfield. I don't think it's helpful. I don't think we see the best of Declan Rice when Soucek's next to him, because what happens is, if Soucek covering for Declan Rice, allowing Declan Rice to go forward, that's great. But with Declan, it's got to be a solo dribble. It's got to be a sort of solo goal. Declan needs other players in the team who can pass and move and bring the best out of him. I'm just not sure we're seeing that at the moment. I don't subscribe to this theory that David Moyes has broken Tomas Soucek. However, he's definitely changed him. All you have to decide really is whether he's changed him for the better or for the worse. Personally, I think it's for the worse.